The day my parents gave my brother $200,000 from my trust fund to save his failing startup was the day I decided to stop being the invisible child. But they had no idea that the anonymous investor who owned most of his company's debt was me. And what I did next would change everything. This is the story of how I went from being the forgotten daughter to becoming my brother's worst nightmare. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll understand why sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. Growing up in my family was like being a ghost in your own house. My name is Sarah, and for 25 years I perfected the art of being invisible while my older brother Jake commanded every room he entered. You know that kid in every family? The golden child who could do no wrong? That was Jake. Charismatic, loud, ambitious. Everything my parents thought success should look like. He was the entrepreneur, the risk-taker, the one with vision. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one in the corner, reading financial reports for fun and building investment portfolios while other teenagers were at parties. My parents saw Jake's confidence and mistook it for competence. They saw my analytical nature and called it playing it safe. When Jake announced he was dropping out of business school to start his first company at 22, they threw him a celebration dinner. When I graduated summa cum laude with a double major in finance and computer science, they gave me a card. "Sarah's always been so careful," my mother would say to her friends, like it was a character flaw. "Not like Jake. He's going to change the world." The irony? While Jake was busy changing the world, I was quietly building my own. I started investing at 16, using money from part-time jobs. By 20, I had turned $3,000 into $30,000. By 25, my portfolio was worth over $2 million. But did my parents know? Of course not. They were too busy funding Jake's latest revolutionary idea. Jake had this pattern. He'd get obsessed with some business concept, convince everyone it was the next big thing, burn through money like it was tissue paper, then move on to the next shiny object when things got difficult. In 5 years, he'd started and abandoned 4 different companies. A meal delivery service that never delivered meals. A social media app that crashed on launch day. A cryptocurrency venture that got him investigated by the SEC. And now his latest masterpiece, Ecologistics, a sustainable supply chain solution that was supposed to revolutionize how companies handle shipping. The problem? Jake knew nothing about logistics, sustainability, or running an actual business. But he was great at PowerPoint presentations and even better at spending other people's money. Which brings me to the trust fund. My grandmother, my father's mother, was the only person who ever really saw me. She was a steel magnolia, sweet on the surface but sharp as a blade underneath. Grandma Rose had built her own small empire through careful investments and smart real estate decisions back when women weren't supposed to do such things. When she passed away when I was 22, she left me something special. A trust fund worth $500,000, with specific instructions that it was for my future. My education, my first home, my own business ventures. The money was supposed to be untouchable until I turned 25, managed by my parents as trustees. I remember the day she called me into her hospital room just days before she died. "Sarah, honey," she said, her voice weak but her eyes still sharp. "I'm leaving you something that your parents don't understand the value of. Not money, anyone can lose money. I'm leaving you independence. Promise me you'll use it wisely." I promised her I would. I had no idea that 3 years later my parents would break that promise for me. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in my office. Yes, I had an office running my own investment consulting firm that my parents thought was cute, when my phone buzzed with my mother's number. "Sarah, sweetie, we need to talk." That tone. Every kid knows that tone. The one that means you're either in trouble or about to be. I met them at the house that evening. Dad was pacing, which he only did when he was nervous. Mom was wringing her hands, which meant she felt guilty about something. And Jake? Jake was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers in front of him, looking like someone had just told him Christmas was cancelled. "We have some news," Mom started. "About your trust fund." My stomach dropped. "What about it?" Dad cleared his throat. "Well, Jake's in a bit of a situation with his company. Ecologistics is struggling. Struggling. I looked at Jake. What does that mean exactly? Jake finally spoke up, and for the first time in my life he didn't sound confident. "We're about to lose everything, Sarah. We owe our suppliers, our investors are pulling out, and we've got debts piling up. If we don't get an injection of capital in the next 2 weeks, we're filing for bankruptcy." "Okay," I said slowly. "That's unfortunate. But what does this have to do with my trust fund?" The silence in that room was deafening. Mom took a deep breath. "We've decided to advance you the money from your trust fund early. And we think the best use of that money would be to help Jake save his company." I stared at them. "You think the best use of my money is to bail out his failing business?" "It's not failing," Jake snapped, some of his old fire returning. "It's just going through a rough patch. This money would be an investment. I'll pay it back with interest." "With what money?" I asked. "You just said you're about to file for bankruptcy." "Sarah," Dad interjected using his disappointed father voice, "family helps family. Jake would do the same for you." I looked around the table at these 3 people who shared my DNA but seemed like complete strangers. They had made a decision about my future without consulting me, without considering what I might want, without even acknowledging that it was my money they were discussing. How much? I asked quietly. 200,000, Mom said. We know it's a lot, but 200,000. I repeated the number, letting it sink in. Nearly half of my inheritance gone. Just like that. And this decision has already been made? Well, yes, Dad said. The transfer went through this morning. We are the trustees, after all, and we felt this was an emergency situation. An emergency. Jake's fifth failed business venture was an emergency, but my financial future apparently wasn't even worth a phone call. I stood up slowly. I see. Sarah, Jake said, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before, fear. I know this is hard, but I promise you this is going to work out. Ecologistics is different from my other ventures. We have real clients, real contracts. Real debt, I finished. Real problems. Real failure. Just like always. That's not fair, Mom protested. Jake has learned from his mistakes. He's grown as an entrepreneur. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Grown? Mother, he's 27 years old and this is his fifth company. The only thing he's grown is his ability to spend other people's money. Sarah Elizabeth, Dad said sharply, that's enough. We made the decision we thought was best for the family. For the family, I repeated. Right. Because I'm not really part of this family, am I? I'm just the quiet one in the corner with the convenient trust fund. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. Where are you going? Mom called after me. I stopped in the doorway and looked back at them. To do what I should have done years ago. Stop being invisible. That night, I did something I'd never done before in my life. I got drunk. Properly, thoroughly rage drunk. I sat in my apartment with a bottle of wine and my laptop, and I started digging into Jake's latest venture. By morning, I had a splitting headache and a complete picture of just how screwed Ecologistics really was. It was worse than I thought. The company wasn't just struggling. It was a disaster wrapped in buzzwords and tied up with false promises. Jake had convinced 3 different investors to put in money based on contracts that didn't actually exist. He'd promised delivery capabilities he couldn't provide and sustainability certifications he didn't have. The 200,000 from my trust fund wasn't going to save Ecologistics. It was just going to prolong its inevitable death. But here's what really got to me. According to the financial documents I could access, Jake wasn't just incompetent. He was living like he was already successful. Company credit cards used for expensive dinners. Business trips to resorts. A Tesla Model S lease under the company name. My brother was literally partying while his company burned, and now my money was going to fund the afterparty. I spent the next week in a haze of fury and planning. I went to work, I smiled at clients, I made small talk about the weather. But inside I was calculating. Because here's the thing about being the invisible child. You learn to observe. You learn to listen. You learn to wait. And I had been waiting my whole life for the right moment to step out of the shadows. The opportunity came in the form of a LinkedIn post. Jake had shared an update about Ecologistics securing emergency bridge funding and looking for strategic investment partners for series of funding. The comments were full of congratulations from people who didn't know they were congratulating him for spending his sister's inheritance. But one comment caught my eye. It was from Marcus Chin, a venture capitalist I'd done some consulting work for the previous year. He was interested in meeting with Jake about potential investment. I stared at that comment for a long time. Then I picked up my phone. Marcus? It's Sarah. I have a business proposition for you. We met the next day at a coffee shop in downtown. Marcus was intrigued by my proposal. I wanted to become an angel investor in Ecologistics funding round, but I wanted to do it anonymously through a shell company. Why the secrecy? He asked. Let's just say I have a personal interest in seeing how this company is really run, I told him. I want access to all financial records, board meetings, strategic planning sessions. Everything. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's a lot of due diligence for an angel investment. Most people just write a check and hope for the best. I'm not most people. He laughed. No, you're definitely not. Here. I can make this work. But I'll need you to commit to at least 100,000 to get the level of access you're asking for. $100,000. It was a huge risk, but I had been making calculated risks my whole life. The difference was this time it was personal. Done. Within 2 weeks, I was officially an anonymous angel investor in my brother's company. Marcus introduced me to the team as Alex Chin, a private investor interested in sustainable logistics. Jake never questioned it. He was too busy being excited about finally getting real funding from serious investors. The irony was delicious. My brother was about to take money from me twice and he had no idea. Being Alex Chin was like being handed superpowers I never knew I wanted. Suddenly, I had access to everything. Financial records, employee complaints, client communications, strategic planning documents. The whole messy truth about Ecologistics. And let me tell you, the truth was even worse than I had imagined. Jake had been lying to everyone. The contracts he'd shown investors were preliminary agreements that had never been finalized. The clients he claimed to have were companies he'd had one meeting with 6 months ago. The sustainable certifications he'd promised were applications he'd never submitted. Ecologistics wasn't just failing, it was built on a foundation of wishful thinking and outright deception. But the real kicker? Jake was already spending the Series A money before it was officially raised. He'd taken advances against expected funding to lease new office space, hire employees he couldn't afford, and yes, make payments on that Tesla. I started attending board meetings as Alex Chin, sitting across the table from my own brother and watching him lie with such confidence that I almost admired it. Almost. Our Q3 projections show significant growth potential, he'd say, clicking through slides that made his imaginary company look like the next Amazon. We're on track to revolutionize the entire logistics industry. The other investors ate it up. Why wouldn't they? Jake was charming, passionate, convincing. He always had been. But I could see what they couldn't. The numbers didn't add up. They never had. After each meeting, I'd go home and document everything. Screenshots of financial records showing where the money really went. Recordings of Jake making promises he couldn't keep. Evidence of the gap between what he told investors and what was actually happening. It was during the fourth board meeting that Jake made the announcement that changed everything. "I'm excited to share that we've secured additional bridge funding from my family," he said proudly. "My parents recognized the incredible opportunity here and decided to invest $200,000 from a family trust. It just shows you the confidence that the people who know me best have in this venture. The people who know him best." I almost laughed out loud. That's when Marcus leaned over and whispered, "Alex, I think we need to consider increasing our investment position. This family backing shows real commitment." I looked across the table at my brother, who was beaming with pride at having just announced that he'd spent my inheritance on his failing company, and I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. "Actually," I said, "I think I'd like to become the lead investor in this round. I'm prepared to put in $300,000. The room went quiet. Jake's eyes went wide. Marcus looked impressed. "That would make you the majority stakeholder," Jake said slowly. "Yes," I replied, meeting his eyes across the table. "It would." For the first time in my life, I had my brother's complete attention. The final board meeting was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in November. By then, I owned 51% of Ecologistics. I had voting control, access to all company assets, and complete authority to make executive decisions. Jake had no idea what was coming. I arrived early and set up my laptop with a presentation I'd been working on for weeks. The title slide was simple: Ecologistics, a complete financial analysis. The other investors filed in: Marcus, 2 other VCs, and Jake's friend who'd put in some money early on. Jake arrived last, looking confident and relaxed. He'd been riding high for weeks, talking about expansion plans and new partnerships that existed only in his imagination. "Before we discuss Q4 strategy," I said once everyone was seated, "I have some concerns about the company's financial situation that I think we need to address." Jake frowned. "What kind of concerns?" I clicked to my first slide. "Let's start with revenue recognition. According to the reports we've been receiving, Ecologistics has booked $1.2 million in revenue this quarter. However, when I examined the actual contracts and payment records, I found that only $180,000 of that revenue has actually been received." The room got very quiet. "That's just timing differences," Jake said quickly. "The payments are coming in. These enterprise clients have different payment cycles." "Actually," I interrupted, clicking to the next slide, "I reached out to all 12 companies listed as clients in our revenue reports. 7 of them have never heard of Ecologistics. 3 had preliminary discussions that never moved forward. And 2 explicitly told us they were not interested in our services." Jake's face was starting to lose color. I continued through my presentation, methodically destroying every claim Jake had made about his company. The fake sustainability certifications. The non-existent partnerships. The equipment leases for vehicles that didn't exist. The employee salaries for people who'd quit months ago but were still on the payroll. "This is ridiculous," Jake finally exploded. "Alex, I don't know where you're getting this information, but I'm getting it from your own company records," I said calmly. "Records that you provided to investors, including the financial statements you submitted to secure the family trust funding." The blood drained from his face. "How do you know about the $200,000 from the family trust?" I clicked to my final slide, which showed a complete breakdown of how that money had been spent. $20,000 for office furniture that was never delivered. $30,000 for a marketing campaign that never launched. $40,000 in salary advances to you personally. $60,000 for the Tesla lease. $30,000 for business development that consisted primarily of expensive dinners. And $20,000 in miscellaneous expenses that have no documentation whatsoever. "You can't possibly know all this," Jake whispered. I stood up slowly and walked around the table to where he was sitting. "You're right, Jake. Alex Jin couldn't know all this." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a folder. But Sarah Mitchell could. The silence in that room was absolute. I opened the folder and placed a photograph on the table in front of him. It was the picture from Grandma Rose's funeral with all of us standing around her casket. Jake picked it up with shaking hands. "Hello, brother. You know that moment in movies when time seems to stop? That's what happened in that conference room." Jake stared at the photograph, then at me, then back at the photograph like his brain couldn't process what was happening. Sarah, he whispered. Surprise. Marcus was the first to recover. Sarah, what the hell is going on? What's going on? I said, walking back to my seat. Is that I just bought my brother's company so I could shut it down and get my inheritance back. Jake found his voice. You can't do this. This is fraud. You lied about who you are. I used a pseudonym for a legal investment. That's not fraud, Jake. What you've been doing for the past 6 months. That's fraud. Lying to investors about revenue, assets, contracts, partnerships. Using company funds for personal expenses. Taking money from a family trust under false pretenses. It wasn't false pretenses, he shouted, standing up so fast his chair fell over. I was trying to build something. I was trying to succeed. You were trying to spend other people's money while living like you'd already succeeded, I shot back. Do you have any idea what you took from me? That trust fund wasn't just money, Jake. It was my future. It was Grandma Rose's gift to me, her investment in the granddaughter who actually listened to her stories about building something from nothing. She loved me too, he said, but his voice was small now. She did. But she also saw through your bullshit. Why do you think she left the money to me and not you? The truth of that hit him like a physical blow. I turned to address the room. As majority shareholder, I'm calling for an immediate vote to dissolve Ecologistics and liquidate all company assets. All in favor? Marcus raised his hand slowly. I have to say this is the most thorough due diligence I've ever seen. The other investors followed suit. Jake watched his company disappear with 4 raised hands. There is some good news, I told him as I packed up my laptop. The company's assets, what few legitimate ones exist, should cover about $60,000 of the debt. And I'm prepared to write off my investment as a loss, which means you won't owe me the $300,000 I put in as Alex Chen. How generous, he said bitterly. I'm not done. I've also filed a claim against the family trust for the $200,000 that was taken without my consent. Since you can't pay it back and since our parents acted as trustees who violated their fiduciary duty, they're personally liable for the full amount. Jake's face went white. You're going after Mom and Dad? I'm recovering my inheritance. The inheritance they gave away without asking me to fund your fantasy. Sarah, please. For 25 years, I watched this family treat you like you were destined for greatness while treating me like I was destined for nothing. You got the attention, the support, the encouragement, the benefit of the doubt. You got 5 chances to build something and you failed every single time. And when you were about to fail again, they gave you my future to cushion your fall. I was at the door now, but I turned back one more time. I spent my whole life being the invisible daughter. But it turns out being invisible has its advantages. You learn to see things other people miss. You learn to wait for the right moment. And you learn that sometimes the quiet ones are the ones you should fear the most. 6 months later, I got the call from my mother. Sarah, we need to talk. Same tone as before, but this time I was the one with all the power. They agreed to pay back the full $200,000 to my trust fund, plus legal fees and damages. Jake moved back in with them while he looked for a real job. His words, not mine. He works in sales now for someone else's company, and from what I hear he's actually not terrible at it when he's not trying to be the CEO. As for me, I used the recovered trust fund money, plus my own investments, to start my own venture capital firm. We specialize in funding women entrepreneurs who've been overlooked by traditional investors, the invisible ones who've been building something real while everyone else was distracted by the flashy failures. My parents still don't understand what I do. They ask about my little investment business, like it's a hobby I'll grow out of. They don't know that my little business just closed a $10 million fund. They don't know that Forbes called me one of the 30 under 30 venture capitalists to watch. They don't know that the quiet daughter they dismissed is building an empire. But Jake knows. He sent me a text last week. I saw the Forbes article. I'm proud of you, Sarah. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Some apologies come too late. People ask me if I regret what I did to my brother. The answer is complicated. Do I regret destroying his company? Well, it was built on lies and was going to collapse anyway. Do I regret the way I did it? Sometimes. But mostly I regret that it took me 25 years to stop being invisible. My grandmother always told me that money wasn't the real gift she was leaving me. Independence was. It took almost losing that gift to understand what she meant. Independence isn't just having money. It's having the courage to use your power when people underestimate you. It's knowing your worth when everyone else treats you as worthless. It's refusing to stay invisible just because it makes other people more comfortable. The invisible daughter is invisible no more. And trust me, that's a lesson my family will never forget. They called me cruel, but they never apologized for stealing my future. Now I'm building my own empire with my own rules and my trust fund is stronger than ever.